Huh?
Okay, I guess this video is now the 2,000 subscriber special. Congratulations! And the Christmas special too, because I'm probably not gonna get anything else done by the end of the year. A fond shout out to all my precious little baby dolls for making this happen. You're all wonderful. So, not too long ago, the trailer for Sony's latest, addition to the Spider-Man Cinematic Universe, which is apparently still a thing because they're determined to make it a thing, was dropped. And as with the other entries in this so-called franchise, this upcoming movie just looks awful. Madame Web. Seriously, who asked for this? Of all the people who know who Madame Web even is as a character, is there a single one of them who thought, yeah, that character should have their own movie? And while there are certain instances where a movie with a bad premise can be elevated into something of decent quality, this ain't it, Chief. With its CW tier costume design, coupled with some truly atrocious dialogue writing,
he was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died.
Well, that's just lazy writing.
and a script that feels like it was fished out from behind a dumpster way back in 2007. Seriously, go watch this trailer and then go check out some schlock like Catwoman or Daredevil and you'll get this eerie sense of deja vu. Also, you'll have watched a really bad movie. Well, it all combines to give the impression that Madame Web is just doomed to failure, similar to Kraven the Hunter and Morbius, which has the distinction of somehow managing to bomb twice at the box office. Sure, the two Venom movies have done well enough, but the thing is you can't base an entire franchise off just two movies, especially when Venom so far hasn't interacted with any other character from the so-called Spider-Man Cinematic Universe. And while some may cite the concept of superhero fatigue if and when these movies end up flopping at the box office, let's be honest, Sony's movies were gonna fail no matter what. I mean, the simple fact of the matter is that an entire cinematic universe based entirely around Spider-Man characters is just doomed to failure. Or is it? If John Sony himself broke into my house, held me at gunpoint and demanded that I create ideas for potentially successful Spider-Man Cinematic Universe movies, I would tell him to shoot me. But if that wasn't an option and I absolutely had to come up with Spider-Man Cinematic Universe ideas, these are some of the concepts I think could actually work.
You know how much I sacrificed?
If there's one lesson to be taken away from Spider-Man No Way Home, it's that Andrew Garfield was a really good Spider-Man actor and he was absolutely held back by some truly atrocious scripts. But if there's another lesson to be taken from that movie, it's that Willem Dafoe and Alfred Molina have not missed a beat since they originally played the Green Goblin and Doc Ock respectively in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy. Seriously, it's uncanny that they're as good now as they were back in the 2000s, and for me at least, they were the highlights of that movie. One of the biggest problems that faces Sony's cinematic universe is that nobody really gives a shit about a lot of the characters they're trying to put front and center. Venom gets by because people actually know who Venom is. If you ask someone on the streets who Venom is, assuming they don't pepper spray you like they do me,
Pepper spray? That sounds delicious! Ah, I was wrong!
they'd be able to tell you that Venom is the big goo monster that Spider-Man fights. But who gives a shit about Morbius? Even Morbius fans are kinda lukewarm about the guy. And as for Kraven fans, I imagine they'd prefer a Kraven movie where he's a villain instead of a hunky anti-hero. But if Sony were to announce movies about characters that general audiences already know about, played by actors who are genuinely liked for playing said character in the past, it would generate a fair bit of groundswell from the announcement. Sony, I assure you, if you were to announce a Green Goblin movie starring Willem Dafoe, the memes of people saying it's Goblin time would be so prominent on Twitter that it would briefly drown out all the Nazi propaganda on that website.
Heil Hitler? Heil?
Would these hypothetical movies need to be set in the Raimi-verse? I wouldn't say explicitly, it would certainly help, but no, it wouldn't really be mandatory. But what is mandatory is keeping the two as villains. You can make them sympathetic villains if you so choose, but they absolutely have to stay evil. That's how these two characters are best known to the general public, but more than that, it would also be a unique selling point for these movies. There are 1,000,000,001 movies about superheroes, but how many supervillain movies are out there? Superhero movies astronomically bombed across 2023. If you want to have a successful one, it needs to have some kind of unique hook or selling point to it these days, and a supervillain movie is just the kind of hook you need. But what would a movie about characters like this even be, plot-wise? Well, that's the kind of thing that would require its own video, but to give out some brief ideas I had to mind, I think for either character, a story about them building up their criminal empire could work pretty well, considering both of them do that in the source material. Have them get into gang wars with more established criminals like Mr. Negative or Hammerhead. Or you could use it as a chance to introduce a non-Spider-Man superhero as the antagonist of the movie. Bottom line, if you make a movie where Willem Dafoe gets to absolutely devour the scenery as the Green Goblin, that shit is gonna make bank. Tying into my earlier point about Sony needing to focus on characters audiences actually know about, the Prowler spent the vast majority of his existence as some D-list loser that basically nobody even knew of.
Look at this dude.
Until, of course, the first Spider-Verse movie dropped and made him unmistakably one of the coolest characters in the entire franchise. So, casual audiences know who the Prowler is, and as a result, they'd probably go and see a movie about the guy, assuming you got a good leading man to play the role and a good director. What would the plot be about? Well, again, without getting too deep into the nitty-gritty of things, I think you could do a decent story where he starts off as a henchman or a villain for hire who has to, for one reason or another, become a hero. Again, it's a somewhat unique take on the superhero movie, and it's also playing into expectations of the Prowler that casual audiences have from his prior outings. He's like Batman, but more purple. Purple is a cool color. I'll freely admit that I'm totally letting my own personal biases put this idea forward, but a movie about the superior foes of Spider-Man would be absolute pure cinema. The original comic book was a short-lived one centering around a small team of Spider-Man's lesser-known backbencher villains, including Shocker, Overdrive, Beetle, Boomerang. Not to be confused with Captain Boomerang, Marvel and DC both have their own weird little Boomerang man, and Speed Demon. They were all losers who had the misfortune of getting tangled up in these big, grand conspiracies involving much more powerful supervillains and criminal empires. And honestly, a movie about a gang of incompetent supervillains having to band together and Ocean's 11 their way through the machinations of a much more powerful supervillain, that's just a really fun idea. People do love a good underdog story, but more than that, it would also be a good vehicle with which to introduce other heroes and more prominent villains in your new cinematic universe. I mean, I guess if James Gunn can't save the DCEU, he could always go and make a Superior Foes movie. James, please God, I'm begging you man, please for the love of God, make a Superior Foes movie before the superhero bubble pops entirely, please, please.
I'm gonna go build my own theme park with blackjack and hookers.
So I've tried to research a bit into whatever deal Disney and Sony have with regards to Spider-Man, but a lot of the specifics seem to be not known to the public, and what is publicly available is just kind of vague and fucky-wucky. It seems that Sony can make use of MCU Spider-Man characters such as the Vulture, but they haven't made any sort of use of Tom Holland's Spider-Man, even though he would be an obvious big draw to any potential movie they make. Presumably, for some reason, Disney aren't in any sort of hurry to let one of their few remaining big MCU characters run off to star in Morbius 2. Shocker, I know. But presumably, if they can't make use of the MCU's Peter Parker, there doesn't seem to be any reason why they couldn't make a live-action movie about a different Spider-Man. After all, there is apparently an Amazon Prime series about Spider-Man Noir in the works. By now, Miles Morales is a fairly well-known character and decently popular to boot, so why not just make a live-action movie with Miles in the leading role? I mean, hell, if you could get a big enough dump truck of money outside of Tobey Maguire's house, you could make it a sequel to Spider-Man 3 where he's training a new successor to take over as Spider-Man. Oh, don't give me that look, Sony. You're already making Madame Web, clearly you have enough money to burn through and waste.
It's not always about the money, Spider-Man. It's about the Mets, baby. Love the Mets. All right, baby, let's go. Get a home run, baby. Love the Mets.
Or, hell, if Sony wanted to go completely balls wild, they could make a Spider-Man 2099 movie. They could even get Oscar Isaac to play the character again. I'm sure he'd be as good as Miguel, both as a voice actor and in live action. The general impression I get with regards to Disney's handling of Spider-Man is that they're fine with Sony doing things with the character as long as A, it's not Peter Parker as the main Spider-Man under the mask in a movie, and B, they manage to get their cut of the profits. And I mean, the uncomfortable truth for Sony about their prospective Spider-Man Cinematic Universe is that, at some point, they're going to need a Spider-Man. I think even absolute garbage like Madame Web or Craven would look a little bit more appetizing to audiences if Spider-Man was visibly present in some capacity. Just a little something for audience members to point at the screen and say, "Look, there he is, Peter the Park Ranger."
No money means no animation.
Yeah, this just kind of feels like a no-brainer to me. Cut your losses and make an animated movie universe instead of another live-action one. People generally love the Spider-Verse movies in comparison to Morbius and the other announced projects, and Disney and DreamWorks are both kinda going through a slump when it comes to animation these days. Seems like a pretty good time to just try and muscle in on their territory. Yeah, I mean, make movies focusing on some of the more popular spiders introduced in the Spider-Verse movies without doing any sort of multiverse plot. Seems simple to me. So, having rambled on for so long with various ideas, P.S. Sony, if you do use any of these, don't forget to send me big truckloads of money. Do I think these concepts would be enough to add any sort of levity or interest into a prospective Spider-Man Cinematic Universe? No, not really. Spider-Man makes for a truly amazing character who has stood the test of time, and his supporting cast are similarly great, but they're just that, a supporting cast. And while many of these characters can function to a degree without Spider-Man to orbit around, some of them clearly struggle. I mean, that much is obvious if you look at something like Morbius or Craven, where the script is clearly straining for anything to do. Many of the characters we've seen so far only take superficial elements from the source material, which sorta defeats the whole point of making a cinematic universe around these characters in the first place. A movie like Joker is making changes for the sake of adaptation, but a movie like Craven is just making shit up. And because it apparently still needs to be said, not everything needs to be an interconnected cinematic universe. Hollywood has yet to learn that lesson. Aside from the MCU, what other cinematic universes have found any real degree of success? The Titanverse starring Godzilla and King Kong, I suppose. But most others are dead in the water like the Dark Universe or the DCEU. The more time goes on, the more the MCU feels like kind of a fluke for how successful it was, or just the novelty of it allowed it to get as far as it did. There's certainly potential for Sony to make good Spider-Man movies. God knows they've managed it in the past, even if every good movie has some kind of Jekyll and Hyde evil counterpart hiding in the shadows. But time will tell if Sony are able to figure out what it was that made Spider-Man and his various supporting characters so popular in the first place, or if they're just going to keep releasing bomb after bomb. Or maybe Madame Web will earn $1 billion at the box office. You never know.
Give me money. Money me. Money now.